Welcome back to the deep dive. Today I want to start with a bit of a headache.
A headache.
Yeah, a metaphorical one. I've been trying to wrap my head around this paradox that seems to exist in every leadership book I've ever read. And honestly, it's in every boss I've ever had. We have this completely impossible standard that we hold people to.
Right, the leadership trap.
Exactly. We want our leaders to be empathetic,
No.
right? We want them to listen. We want them to be, soft and approachable.
But not too soft.
Right, because if they're too soft, we call them weak. We say they can't make the hard calls when the pressure's on. So then we pivot and say, okay, we want a leader who is strong, unyielding, a man of steel.
And then what happens? They turn into tyrants, and everybody hates them.
It is the ultimate Goldilocks problem of authority. And usually we assume you just have to pick a lane. You're either the nice guy who finishes last, or you're the ruthless executive who gets results but everyone is secretly terrified of. But today, the stack of notes you've brought to the table is challenging that binary in a way that is, frankly, messing with my head.
Well, it should mess with your head. Because the source material we are unpacking today, which is a really deep structural analysis of Surah Al-Imran, specifically verses 159 to 163, and then later we'll get into the economic verses 180 to 186, it's arguing for something that sounds physically impossible.
It's arguing for a leader who is simultaneously as soft as silk and as hard as steel, not switching back and forth depending on whether they had their morning coffee, but holding those two opposing states in a perfect calibrated tension.
Yes, and we have to be very careful how we frame this right from the start. We aren't just talking about personal development here. This isn't a corporate seminar on how to be a better middle manager.
Right.
The source material frames these ancient verses as the foundational constitution for a very specific social order. It refers to it as the Nizam-i-Rabugyat, or the system of sustenance.
And that context changes literally everything. Because if you just read this as, be nice to people, it sounds like a Hallmark card. But this Mizam, this is a blueprint for a society that functions completely differently from modern capitalism or, frankly, even modern democracy.
Correct. It is a unified system where economics, human psychology, and political leadership are all fused together. You really cannot understand the leadership style if you don't understand the economic mandate to circulate wealth.
And you can't understand the economics if you don't get the psychological internal hell of hoarding, which the text goes into in intense detail.
Exactly. It's all connected.
We have a massive amount of ground to cover for you today. We got a leadership model that uses this water skin metaphor that is honestly kind of gross, but incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
We've got a political theory based entirely on bees.
The beehive model of consultation, it's a fascinating alternative to the ballot box.
And we have callers of fire and thirsty travelers. So let's just jump right in. I want to start where the text starts, which is surprisingly not with a set of rigid rules, but with a personality trait.
Verse 159, it says, "It is part of the mercy of Allah that you are lenient to them." Lenat. It translates to softness or pliability.
Okay, stop right there, because I have to push back on this immediately. Softness is not a word that inspires confidence for me. If I'm in a crisis, if society is falling apart, I don't want a soft leader. I want a general. I want grit. Isn't starting the entire blueprint with softness just setting the leader up to be walked all over?
That is the modern Machiavellian lens talking. We have been conditioned to associate forceful dominance with competence. But look at the argument the source is actually making here. It isn't saying be a doormat. It's describing a mechanism of physical attraction.
Attraction, like charisma.
More like gravity. Think about what holds a solar system together. It's a central mass that pulls things in. The source argues that for a human community to stick together, especially a community that isn't being paid a corporate salary and isn't being violently coerced by a police state, the only force strong enough to hold those people together is this specific quality of mercy, or lanat.
So you're saying it's the glue?
It is the gravity. And the text actually proves this by flipping the scenario entirely. It says, "And had you been severe and harsh-hearted, they would have broken away from about you."
Broken away. The imagery there is really interesting.
It's deeply physical. The Arabic implies dispersion, like a magnetic field completely failing and all the iron filings just dropping off the table. If the core of the leadership is hard and repulsive, the structure just naturally collapses. But we really need to dig into that specific term, harsh-hearted, because the English translation is just way too polite.
Yeah, the Arabic term used in the text is galizul kalb.
Galizul kalb. Now, casually, if we were just chatting, we'd say that means someone is mean-spirited or rude. But the source material takes us deep into the etymology of the word, and it paints a picture that is absolutely crucial for understanding this whole system of sustenance.
This was the water skin metaphor I mentioned in the intro. And I want you to really paint this picture for everyone listening, because when I read your notes on this, something just clicked for me.
Okay, so imagine the historical context. 7th century Arabia. You are in the deep desert. Survival is entirely 100% dependent on a single resource, which is water. And you carry your water in a skin, a leather bag.
Right. Standard desert survival gear.
Now, what happens to animal leather in that extremely harsh environment if it is not cared for? If it gets old, neglected, and just bakes in the desert sun?
It dries out. It gets stiff.
It becomes gallis. It becomes thick, rough, and literally as hard as a rock. It freezes in place. Now imagine a traveler is dying of thirst in the desert. He crawls up to you. You have a water skin. There's water inside it. You can literally hear it sloshing around. The life-saving resource is right there.
Okay, I see where this is going.
But the container, which represents the leader's heart in this metaphor, is so hard, so calcified, that you physically cannot open it. The neck of the leather bag is frozen shut. The leather just won't yield.
So the water is trapped inside.
The benefit is trapped. The source uses this vivid imagery to define the hard-hearted leader. It's not necessarily someone who screams and yells at their employees. It's someone who has the capacity to help. They have the resources, the wisdom, the power, the money. But their internal state is so miserly and frozen that they cannot let a single drop of benefit flow out to the people who desperately need it.
That's actually horrific when you picture it. It's not just being mean, it's being a tease. It's standing over a dying person, holding the cure, and just refusing to uncap the bottle.
That is exploitation. That is the fundamental definition of a leader who extracts value from the community, but absolutely refuses to circulate any of it back. And the text is saying, if you had been like that, a frozen water skin, the people would have dispersed. Because humans have a basic survival instinct. We naturally run away from things that only take and never give.
So, softness, or lina, in this context, isn't about being a pushover at all. It's about being permeable.
Flowing. That is the key word the source relies on. A leader must be like a freshly oiled water skin, pliable, flexible, and always ready to pour out benefit to the thirsty.
But here's the paradox we open the show with. Because if you just pour and pour, eventually you run empty. Or worse, someone comes along with a knife, slashes the water skin, and takes everything by force. The source material is very clear that this softness has a hard limit.
Absolutely. And this is where the source engages in a bit of comparative theology, which is fascinating. It actively critiques what it calls the Christian misconception.
We need to tread carefully here to make sure we are just reporting what the text says, but walk us through that argument.
Of course. The source argues that historically the heavy emphasis on the concept that God is love and the explicit instruction to turn the other cheek, while those are beautiful, high-level spiritual ideals, they failed as a practical geopolitical strategy.
Right.
The argument the author makes is that if you meet a hungry wolf with a warm hug, you don't get a reformed vegan wolf. You get a well-fed wolf.
You get eaten.
You get eaten. So the source says a functional surviving system requires duality. You need the lina, the softness, for the internal community. The people who are actively building the system with you, you nurture them. You pour water for them. But against those who are actively trying to dismantle or destroy the system, the specific term used is kufar. Those who reject and cover up the truth against them, you cannot be soft water. You must be hard as steel.
There's a brilliant line from the poet Iqbal in the notes you provided. He says, in the gathering of friends, be soft like silk. In the battlefield of truth, be hard as steel.
And if you think about the physics of that, silk and steel are complete opposite materials. But let's go back to the water metaphor. Water is inherently soft, right? You can easily put your hand right through a stream of water.
Sure.
But what happens if you freeze that exact same water? It becomes ice. It gets rock hard. Or think about modern engineering. If you pressurize water in an industrial jet cutter, it can slice cleanly through thick sheets of titanium. The actual substance hasn't changed at all.
Just the state.
Exactly. The state changes entirely based on the environmental need.
That's a profound way to look at adaptation. The leader isn't bipolar. They are perfectly responsive to the environment.
Precisely. Because if you are rock hard with your friends and allies, you shatter the community. But if you are soft and yielding with a violent enemy, you lose the community to conquest. The leader in this nizam has to have an immense emotional intelligence to switch states instantly. It is not hypocrisy, it is protection.
Which is a perfect segue into the actual mechanics of this leadership.
Yep.
Because you can have the right personality, you can master the silk and steel dynamic,
Right.
but how do you actually make the decisions? Do you just sit on a throne and decree things because you're the boss?
The text emphatically says no. And this brings us to the beehive model. Verse 159 continues right after praising the softness, and it issues a direct command. Consult them in the matter.
Shura.
Yes, shura, a mechanism of consultation.
Now, I have to ask the obvious theological question here on behalf of anyone listening. If the prophet is receiving direct revelation, if he literally has wahi, a direct line to divine wisdom, why on earth does he need to ask regular, flawed people for their opinions? It seems incredibly inefficient.
It is incredibly inefficient if efficiency is your only metric for success. But the source argues that the goal of this societal system isn't just making the right tactical choice as quickly as possible. The overarching goal is making the right people.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning, if the leader just dictates every single move from on high, the community remains in a permanent state of psychological infancy. They never learn to critically think, they never develop their own potential, and crucially, they never feel true ownership over the society. By commanding the prophet to consult the people, the text is establishing an unbreakable precedent. You have to build the collective intellect. You have to make the citizens feel that this system belongs to them, not just to the ruler.
Okay, that sounds exactly like modern democracy. Power to the people. Voting booths.
You would think so. But here is where the source throws a massive curveball. It explicitly and actually quite aggressively critiques the Western model of democracy. Specifically, it attacks the 51% rule.
The simple majority vote.
Right. The source argues that truth is not a popularity contest. Just because 51% of a population wants to do something, that does not organically make it the correct or moral action. And the text uses a phrase here that, well, you might find it a bit offensive to modern sensibilities.
Lay it on me.
It says that in a pure head-counting democratic system, a donkey's vote counts exactly the same as a thinker's vote.
Whoa. Okay. That's heavily elitist. I mean, that's the classic ancient argument against democracy, isn't it? The idea that the masses are too stupid to govern themselves. That sounds like a very slippery slope straight back to dictatorship.
I'm really glad you reacted that way because it perfectly highlights the tension in the text. But the source isn't saying the needs of the masses don't matter. It's saying that opinions are not all created equal when it comes to technical execution. If you need complex brain surgery, you don't poll the people sitting in the waiting room to decide where to make the incision.
You ask the neurosurgeon.
Exactly. You value specific expertise over sheer volume of voices. And to explain how this democratic but expert system actually works in practice, the source points to the linguistic roots of the word shura itself. The Arabic root word isn't connected to raising hands or voting. It is fundamentally connected to bees.
The beehive.
Yes. Think deeply about the biology and behavior of a worker bee. It leaves the hive. It flies out to a flower. Does it rip up and take the whole flower?
No, just the nectar.
It extracts the essence, the absolute best part of that specific plant. And it does this across thousands of different flowers in entirely different environments, miles apart. Then all of these individual bees return to the central hive carrying these tiny, distinct droplets of diverse truth.
Okay, I really like this imagery. So in this metaphor, the citizens of the society are the bees.
Yes, the citizens go out into their specific, varied fields of life. Agriculture, civil engineering, warfare, education, medicine. They gather the nectar of their highly specific lived experience, and they bring that raw, specialized data back to the leadership, which is the hive.
And the leadership's job isn't to just count how many bees showed up.
Exactly, no. The leadership's job is to process the nectar, to synthesize it, to run the mechanism of the hive that turns that raw, chaotic input into honey.
Honey being the final policy decision.
Precisely, because honey is a completely new substance. It's not just a messy pile of raw nectar. It has been chemically transformed. It is a synthesized, unified product. The source argues that shura is the specific social mechanism of turning diverse, sometimes conflicting human experience into a unified, nourishing direction for the state.
But here is the major difference from a modern parliament or Congress. In a literal hive, the bees aren't forming factions and fighting each other.
Right. There is no rose party fiercely debating the tulip party. A bee doesn't land at the hive and say, I am going to withhold my nectar from the collective unless you give my sector a tax break. They contribute entirely based on their capacity. The paradigm is contribution versus conflict.
That is a highly beautiful ideal. But let's be real for a second. Humans aren't actually bees. We have massive egos. We hold grudges. We argue incessantly. Eventually, in any consultation, the talking has to stop, or nothing gets done.
And the verse perfectly accounts for human nature there. It says, "Then, when you have taken a decision, put your trust in Allah." This introduces the concept of azm, determination, firmness.
Ah, so the steel makes a return.
The steel returns. The source heavily emphasizes that once the consultation phase is over, once the honey is made, the debate club is officially closed. The leader must act, even if people start to waver, even if the approval polls drop. The heavy burden of the leader is to hold the course when the storm hits.
It seems like every single part of the system is perfectly designed to balance these opposing forces. Consultation, then swift action. Softness, then steel.
And protection, then sacrifice. Which brings us perfectly to the next major metaphor in the text, lowering the wing.
This one is definitely more tender than the water skin. It's the hen and chicks image.
It is. The text references verse 3.215 in this context, telling the leader to lower your wing to the believers. The source asks us to vividly picture a mother hen. She's just pecking around the dirt, doing her normal thing. But then a shadow passes over the ground. A hawk is circled.
Extreme danger from above.
Now, biologically speaking, what is the absolute primary instinct of any living creature on Earth?
Self-preservation. Survival. You run and save yourself.
Exactly, run and hide. But the hen entirely overrides that core biological instinct. She clucks and calls the chicks to her. She puffs herself up to look bigger. She physically lowers her wings to the dirt to cover them. She intentionally puts her own soft, vulnerable body directly between the apex predator and the community.
She turns herself into the shield.
The source argues that this is the defining ultimate test of a leader in the Nizam. The question is, are you using the people to protect your own power and wealth? Or are you using your power and wealth to protect the people?
That really is the ultimate question, isn't it? If you look at modern corporate culture, it's usually the former. When the company's in trouble, the CEO fires 10,000 workers to protect the stock price. The chicks get fed to the hawk so the hen can survive.
And the source connects this protective instinct directly to the concept of true social unity. It says you simply cannot buy this kind of deep loyalty. It references verse 8.63, which says, "If you had spent all that is in the earth, you could not have united their hearts."
You can hire mercenaries. You can pay people to fight for you.
You can hire employees, yes. You can buy political votes. But you absolutely cannot buy the kind of cemented wall unity where citizens are legitimately willing to die for one another. That level of cohesion only comes from a shared ideology. The divine code combined with a leader who has demonstrably proven they are willing to take the fatal hit for the flock.
Okay, so we have the leader's psychology define the soft and hard dynamic. We have the political process define the beehive of Shura. But now we're getting to the engine that actually powers the whole thing, the economics.
This is where the rubber meets the road.
Now, honestly, if you're listening right now, this is where the source material gets kind of scary, because we are making a very sharp pivot from be like a protective mother hen to collars of fire and total social collapse.
We are looking at verses 180 to 186 now. The source aggressively frames the entire Quranic social system around one single foundational concept. In fact,
which usually translates simply to spending.
Usually, yes. But the source redefines it much more broadly as circulation, keeping resources open, moving, and flowing through the society, and therefore it defines the ultimate evil, the root cause of all social destruction, as bukhl.
Stinginess. Being a miser.
But again, we have to completely redefine the word to understand the text. Bukhl isn't just about being cheap. It's not about skipping the tip at a restaurant or buying generic brands. The source defines bukhl structurally as stopping the flow.
Stopping the flow of what, exactly?
Of the raw resources that God created to sustain all of humanity. The source sets up a very stark binary worldview here. On one side, you have the capitalist view, and the source explicitly uses that modern framing, which dictates, I earned this wealth. It is mine. I have the absolute moral right to hold it and hoard it.
Possession is 9/10 of the law.
Right. It's mine. On the exact opposite side, you have the Quranic view, which states, to Allah belongs the heritage of the heavens and the earth, meaning fundamentally you do not own anything. You are merely a custodian. You are temporarily managing God's property. And the ultimate owner's primary instruction to the manager is keep the resources moving.
So in this paradigm, good or care is literally just flow.
Yes. Think of a river. A river that flows rapidly is fresh. It supports fish, it waters crops, it brings life. That active flow is care.
And evil or shar.
Evil is a river that is artificially dammed up. The water stops moving, it becomes stagnant, it breeds mosquitoes and disease, it rots. That stagnation is shar.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. It's basically a hydraulic model of human morality.
A hydraulic model. I like that. And this leads directly to the terrifying consequence of damming the river. Verse 180 says, "Their wealth which they hoard will be tied like a collar around their necks on the day of resurrection."
Now, traditionally, when people hear a verse like that, they immediately think of the afterlife. You die, you were a greedy person, so you get punished with a burning metallic necklace in hell. Kind of Ghost Rider-style retribution.
And the source absolutely accepts that metaphysical reality. But remember, the premise of this deep dive is the nizam, the functional social system, right here on Earth. The source forcefully argues that this collar of fire is a sociological inevitability in this life.
How so? Walk me through the mechanics of that. How is my offshore savings account a collar of fire?
Think about the societal physics of hoarding. When a specific class of people, the hard-hearted frozen waterskins we talked about, when they continuously accumulate the surplus wealth of a nation and absolutely refuse to circulate it back into the working class, what happens?
Well, the economic gap widens. The rich get massively richer, and the poor get crushed by inflation and poverty.
And as that wealth gap widens into a chasm, what happens to the underlying psychology of the society? The have-nots become desperate just to feed their kids. Then that desperation turns into envy. And then that envy turns into violent hatred.
The pressure just builds and builds behind the dam.
Exactly. And the hoarders who dammed the river, what happens to their lives? Do they actually feel safe with all that money?
No. They have to live in gated communities. They have to build higher walls. They have to hire armed private security. They have to buy off politicians to maintain their status.
They literally become prisoners of their own hoarded wealth. That paranoia and isolation is the collar. The wealth wraps tightly around their necks, it restricts their freedom of movement, and eventually, inevitably, it attracts the fire of violent revolution.
You're talking about the French Revolution, the Bolsheviks in Russia. Yeah. Eat the rich.
It is every single moment in human history where the economic inequality became so incredibly toxic that the society just snapped and burned itself to the ground. The source is warning. If you hoard, you are literally forging the iron chains that will eventually strangle you and your children.
So the fire in the verse isn't just God throwing lightning bolts from the clouds. It's the completely natural mathematical consequence of breaking the physical law of flow.
It is the wealth itself violently turning against its owner.
There is a story in your notes about the companion Umar that I think really illustrates how seriously the early community took this warning. Because today, we treat wealth accumulation as the entire point of human existence. He who dies with the most toys wins. But these people were legitimately terrified of surplus wealth.
They were deeply terrified. When verse 9.34 was revealed, which is the specific verse warning against hoarding gold and silver, the source says the reaction in the community was sheer panic.
The quote is, "The people's legs shook."
Imagine that level of societal conviction. A verse comes down regarding monetary policy, and the entire community goes into a state of existential crisis. They ran to each other asking, what wealth can we safely keep? Because if keeping money is literally forging a collar of fire, are we even allowed to save for a rainy day? Can we leave an inheritance for our children?
It's a highly valid practical question. Because if I give absolutely everything away today, tomorrow I become a financial burden on someone else. That doesn't build a strong society either.
Right. So Umar, recognizing the panic, went directly to the prophet to clarify the law. And the answer provided the exact structural balance the society needed. The prophet clarified that wealth is meant for the healthy sustenance of the family and the immediate community. You keep what you genuinely need. You keep what creates household stability.
Right.
But the surplus, the excess capital that is just sitting idle in vaults, piling up simply for the ego of piling up, that is the extreme danger zone. That surplus is the life-saving water you are withholding from the thirsty traveler in the desert.
It loops right back to the frozen water skin. You can drink from it, your family can drink from it, but you cannot sit on top of the only well in the desert and charge admission.
Exactly. And this selfish economic behavior isn't just a matter of moving numbers on a ledger. It digs violently deep into the human psyche. Which brings us perfectly to section 5 of the text, the psychology of hypocrisy.
The source material calls this the internal hell of the hypocrite. And honestly, looking through the notes, this is by far the most psychological, modern-sounding part of the entire text.
It really is. The Quran frequently talks about the munafiq, the hypocrite, but the source completely reframes hypocrisy. It's not just defined as lying to people. It defines it as a state of devastating internal fracture.
Like a split personality.
Think about the wealthy hoarder again. Why do they hoard in the first place? It's driven by deep-seated fear, insecurity, a lack of trust in the future. But if that same person publicly claims to be a believer, someone who claims to implicitly trust in God's system of provision, they now have a massive internal contradiction.
Their tongue is saying, I trust God completely. But their locked bank account is screaming, I only trust myself and my money.
Exactly. And actively holding those two totally contradictory realities together in your brain creates immense psychological friction, cognitive dissonance. The source references verses from Surah 104, speaking of the fire of Allah which leaps over the hearts.
Leaps over the hearts. That is a very specific anatomical phrase.
It beautifully describes clinical anxiety. It describes a fire that isn't physically burning your skin, but is incinerating your nervous system from the inside out. The hypocrite lives in a constant, exhausting state of looking over their shoulder. Will I be found out? Will the market crash and I lose my money? Will my security guards turn on me? They are literally never at peace.
It's a living hell.
It is hell on earth, but the source is radically arguing that hell begins right now. It begins the exact moment your internal reality, your actual heart, and your external reality, your public actions, fall completely out of alignment.
And the source gives a very brutally practical test to diagnose this hypocrisy. It's not about how long your beard is or how perfectly you pronounce the Arabic in your prayers.
No. The touchstone, the ultimate acid test of faith, is the wallet.
The wallet. It always comes down to the money.
You can fake a long, pious prayer. You can easily fake a warm smile. You can fake charitable, encouraging words. But when the community faces a crisis and says, we desperately need resources to survive, and you actually have to reach into your pocket and decrease your net worth, that is the exact millisecond the absolute truth of your character comes out.
The hand doesn't lie.
The hand always reveals the heart. If the hand is hard and closed tight, the heart is galiz, it's frozen. If the hand is soft and opens easily, the heart is lanat, it's soft. Economics in this system is the primary diagnostic tool for a person's spirituality.
There is a historical story included here that I think seals this point perfectly. It's the famous encounter between Heraclius and Abu Sufyan.
Yes, this is one of the most widely cited incidents in early Islamic history, but the source analyzes it purely from the psychological character baseline angle.
Set the scene for us.
So Heraclius is the emperor of Rome, the absolute geopolitical superpower of the day. He receives a diplomatic letter from this unknown man deep in the Arabian desert claiming to be a new prophet of God. Now, Heraclius is a sophisticated, highly educated ruler. He wants to properly vet this incredible claim.
He has a thorough background check.
He finds out there happens to be a Meccan trade caravan currently in his city, and it's being led by a man named Abu Sufyan. Now, at this specific point in history, Abu Sufyan is not a Muslim. In fact, he is the archenemy of the Prophet. He is the primary military and political leader of the opposition.
So if anyone on earth is going to totally trash the Prophet's reputation, it's this guy.
Exactly. It's the perfect hostile witness. Heraclius hauls him into the royal court and asks him a series of rapid-fire diagnostic questions. Is he from a noble family? Does he ever break his military treaties? Who exactly follows him, the rich elites or the poor?
But out of all those questions, there was one specific inquiry that the source highlights as the absolute key to the whole interview.
Heraclius asks him directly, did you ever accuse him of lying before he claimed prophethood?
He's asking about his foundational baseline character.
Yes. Before the controversy, before the radical new laws, before the wars, was he known to your community as a liar? And Abu Sufyan, literally gritting his teeth because he wants to destroy this man, has to tell the truth. He says, no, we called him the trustworthy.
He couldn't pin a single lie on him.
And Heraclius, being a wise judge of human nature, draws a profound logical conclusion. He states, a man who does not lie to people about small worldly things would not suddenly start lying about God regarding such massive cosmic things.
What's the main takeaway there for our deep dive into leadership?
The takeaway is absolute integrity. The Prophet's proposed system worked because he himself was a completely unified being. There was no internal hell of hypocrisy. His softness, his linah was real. His steel, his azm was real. His commitment to the economic flow was real because he was entirely integrated as a human being. He possessed the gravity required to integrate a fractured society.
You can't build a unified strong wall with cracked, broken bricks.
Exactly. You have to be whole first.
We're coming into the final stretch of the source material here, and it's a sobering shift. We've built the perfect leader, we've structured the Shura beehive, we've started circulating the wealth to put out the collars of fire. But the text explicitly warns that even if you do all of this perfectly, it is not going to be smooth sailing.
No. In fact, it practically guarantees the exact opposite. Verse 186 states very plainly, "You shall certainly be tried in your wealth and in your lives."
Tried. Tested. Now, the armchair theologian in me has to ask, why? If God is omniscient and knows everything, why does he need to systematically test me? Does he need to run an experiment to find out if I'm actually strong?
That is a very common, very human misconception of the text. The specific Arabic word used for trial here is bala. The source deeply explains that bala does not mean a test of knowledge, like a university professor testing a student to see if they memorize the textbook. It fundamentally means to reveal what is hidden, or to bring out dormant potential.
So it's not a written exam, it's an exercise.
It's the gym. The source uses a brilliant analogy of a wrestler to explain this.
Walk us through the wrestler analogy.
Imagine a young man in the village. He looks incredibly strong. He has big muscles. He walks around talking a very big game. He tells everyone, "I am the strongest man in the world." But is he actually the strongest?
You literally don't know until he gets in a fight.
Until he steps into the ring, until he faces active, aggressive resistance. The opponent, which represents the trial or the bala, doesn't just passively measure his existing strength. In a very real physiological way, the opponent creates the strength. The physical friction of the wrestling match is what forces the muscle fibers to tear and then rebuild denser and stronger.
So the trials, the text, promises, the sudden loss of wealth, the fear of enemies, the sheer difficulty of maintaining the system, these aren't punitive punishments from an angry God.
Not at all. They are the required friction for human evolution. The source argues that without severe resistance, human potential remains entirely dormant. We remain comfortable little seeds that never crack open. The trial is the pressure that breaks the shell so the tree can grow.
And part of that specific trial, the text warns, is going to be psychological warfare. The verse explicitly says, "You shall certainly hear much hurtful speech from those who oppose you."
Propaganda, mockery, character assassination. The source warns that when you actually try to establish a real system of economic justice and flow, the hard-hearted people, the hoarders whose wealth you are threatening, they won't just fight you on the battlefield with swords. They will aggressively fight you in the public square with words. They will launch smear campaigns. They will call you madmen. They will call you naive poets. They will call you liars.
They are actively trying to get under your skin.
Yeah.
They want to trigger you.
They want to provoke a disproportionate reaction. They want the dangerously soft leader to lose his cool, lash out, and become a tyrant, which destroys his credibility. Or they want the steel leader to emotionally crumble under the pressure and just give up and go home.
So what is the prescribed countermove to this propaganda? How does the leader survive the hurtful speech?
It goes back to two concepts. Azm, which is unyielding determination, and taqwa, which in this context means extreme self-control and adherence to the law. The source says the ultimate victory lies in calmly holding the paradox. You don't get emotional, you don't return petty abuse with petty abuse, you simply stay on the path and let the system prove itself.
And that path, the source, has a very unique structural view on the nature of that path, too. It is not a circle.
Right. If you look at many ancient classical philosophies, Greek thought, certain Hindu traditions, time and history, are entirely cyclical. The great wheel of life. You are born, you suffer, you die, you repeat. The source compares the cyclical view to a blindfolded ox walking endlessly around an oil press. You exhaust yourself walking 1,000 miles, but at the end of the day, you end up in the exact same spot you started.
And honestly, a lot of people feel like their daily life under modern capitalism is exactly that, the hamster wheel.
But the Quranic view of human destiny, according to the source material, is strictly linear. It is called the Sirat al-Mustaqim, the straight ascending path. It is a steep climb up a mountain.
You are constantly evolving.
You are evolving upward. Every single trial you endure, every difficult act of spending your wealth, every moment of extreme restraint when someone insults you, these are not just random suffering. They are the structural footholds on the mountain. You aren't just spinning your wheels in the dirt. You are actively becoming a higher, more complex version of a human being.
Wow. So let's try to somehow land this plane. We have covered a truly massive amount of ground today.
We really have. It's a dense text.
We started with the central paradox of the leader, the water skin that must be perfectly soft and pliable enough to pour out life-saving benefit, combined with the steel that must be hard and unyielding enough to protect the community from wolves.
The ultimate duality of character.
Then we moved to the beehive model of politics, the radical idea that society needs to gather the nectar of highly diverse, specialized expertise rather than just blindly counting heads like donkeys to process and create the honey of wise, actionable policy.
Valuing contribution over endless partisan conflict.
Then we looked at the economic engine, the mandate of flow, the genuinely terrifying concept of the collar of fire, which we realize isn't just a spooky threat for the afterlife, but a precise historical description of the sociological guillotine that is waiting for any society that excessively hoards wealth and ignores the thirsty traveler.
The hydraulic law of societal rise and fall.
And finally, we explored the internal hell of the hypocrite whose wallet doesn't match their words, and the absolute necessity of painful friction, the wrestler's opponent, to force us to grow.
And I think if you step back from all these details, you realize that these aren't 5 different disconnected topics. They are one single living ecosystem.
How so? Bring it all together for us.
You simply cannot sustain the economic system of flow if you have a hard-hearted, tyrannical leader. The tap will be forcefully closed. You cannot achieve the beautiful unity of the protective mother hen if you have the collar of fire actively creating bitter class warfare in the streets. And the bees won't ever come back to the hive to consult if the hive is currently burning down due to hoarding.
It's like a biological organism. It completely collapses if even one major organ fails.
It is the Nizam-e-Rabubiyat in its entirety. It demands, without compromise, that the political leader, the economic framework, and the individual psychology of the citizens all perfectly align towards one singular goal, the physical and spiritual nourishment of humanity.
And that profound alignment brings me to the final thought I want to leave everyone listening with today. We talked a lot about hell in this deep dive. The collar of fire strangling the rich, the fire of anxiety leaping over the hearts of the hypocrite.
Yes, very heavy concepts.
But we clearly defined that hell not just as some mythical place you are sent to after you die, but as a visceral psychological state of extreme anxiety, contradiction, and paranoia that you live in right now if you break these natural laws of flow.
Correct. The internal hell starts the moment the flow stops.
So if hell is effectively a present, achievable state of mind based on hoarding, does that logically mean that heaven is too?
That is the most provocative implication of the entire text. If hell is the grinding anxiety of the miserly hoarder, then heaven logically must be the profound peace of the generous giver. The source heavily implies that the garden isn't just a luxurious destination you wait your whole life to arrive at, it is an active state of being. You can literally enter the garden the exact moment you finally open the frozen water skin. You can enter heaven today the moment you let the flow begin.
You can enter heaven the moment you let the flow begin. That is an incredibly powerful place to stop.
It really is the only place to start.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. If you're out there listening, go find some water skins in your own life to open up.
And definitely watch out for the hawks.
We will see you next time.